Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues and listeners, here we are again, another weekend show. And I say weekend show because I was reprimanded by our technical director for keep saying it's a Friday show, it's a Saturday show, it's a Sunday show. It's a weekend show, but the schedules are so tight that myself and Stephen sometimes pump it out on a Friday, a Saturday or a Sunday. So cleared that one up. Welcome to the weekend show. Stephen, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again, Chris. Yeah, I think that gives us some flexibility or a degree of latitude in when we do the record. So as long as it goes out before Sunday at midnight, 23:59 UK time, it's still the weekend show.
It's still the weekend show. And to show how committed I am to this particular show, it's my birthday today. And I'm happy to be online with you for the second time in a day, Stephen.
Second time today, Chris. Yeah. The earlier session was not recorded, thankfully. And will not be published. But many happy returns, Chris. Congratulations. You don't look a day older than when I spoke to you only half an hour ago.
Thank you so much. You're always full of that polished shine. Stephen, now, I've got to say again, I also managed to share today with somebody who not only do I like, and I got to know as he was growing into the man he is today, and he's relatively young in industry standards. Very bright young man.
Joe Notter.
Pardon?
Joe Notter.
No. I'm very proud of my son, of course, yeah. I thought you were thinking I was talking about you there for a minute. No, but I did a podcast this morning with Brendan Sullivan. Brendan Sullivan, the new head of IATA cargo. Absolute diamond, really good choice. And during the course of the discussion, I said to him, them appointing him is a little bit like if you support a team and somebody signs like Messi or Ronaldo, you think, yes, now, there's going to be a good season ahead. And I think he's that good. So I think he's a very, very popular choice. And we went through some good subject matters and we covered a lot of the current issues, but also just a little insight into what he's going to be doing and what he's going to focus on. So I think Willie and Nick are going to be very, very happy with their younger member of the trio. So absolutely superb.
Well, I don't know Brendan, but wish him every success in his new role as the industry recovers from this bloody awful pandemic. But what I do know is Willie has a very strong talent for attracting good people around him. And surrounding himself by people that are can bring the business forward or help with the challenges of the day. And I think actually it's great therefore to see that sort of some of the first senior appointments, the shaking of the tree in IATA does not revert back to type. Type being, Chris, the traditional dare I say industry, sort of stalwart or industry, veteran who would normally fill these type of roles towards the twilight years of their career. I think actually bringing somebody in who's able to kind of go get him, if you like, is probably good with some more fire in their belly, and I think that probably is what the industry needs right now.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. But one of the things that we were talking about, and I think it's very, very relevant at the moment, is the whole world is up and down like a fiddler's elbow. Okay, and it's can we, can't we, will we, won't we? But the one thing for sure is that the cargo capacity is still at a huge shortage. So now, if for whatever reason passenger is delayed further and has further problems, that capacity and the price of the capacity is going to affect decisions that are going to be made for medium to longer term with regards to logistics from across parties who need to make use of air freight. So instead of the old days of just in time or just in case, and now, should we now start investing onshore and have distribution centers and start stocking up and not being held ransom to what goes on everywhere else? Cargo's got a serious issue to address on how to keep itself ahead of the game. And one of the areas we spoke about as well was competency, compliance, having enough people. And now in today's paper, one of the things we've got here is this this pingdemic or this ping peril, where it's so easy now for huge tranches of people just to be taken out of the workplace. So it's really, really important now to maintain service standards and service levels because of the high rates that are being charged and the limited capacity. But one thing for sure, there should not be a spare cubic meter or position available on any freight that flies, any aircraft that flies now, because it's so important to occupy all that space.
Well, I guess, I mean, that would suit the airline reasonably well, I suspect, Chris, providing the yields are in the right place. And we know that you know, in March, April last year, I think you and I were doing some work for a client, and we were searching for capacity. I seem to remember we're looking for you know, 300 tons over a couple of rotations, and I remember the prices that you and I were getting from the market were just, I mean, eye-watering, Chris. I mean, it was absolutely eye-watering, mind-boggling. You know, pleased to say, I think for the greater good and the greater sort of benefit of the population and the industry and you know, commerce as a whole, is prices have very much reset themselves now, certainly to a much more palatable level. But I do think that that whilst there is, well, a couple of things. One is the yield expectation of carriers who've got a very suppressed demand in the passenger business. They'll be looking to reap every single dollar and cent that they can, and that's not just a question, as you know, of filling the hold or filling the main deck or the belly space. It's a question of actually getting the right cargo at the right price, and that doesn't mean filling the aircraft necessarily, because it means allowing for premium courier traffic or perishables, pharma stuff at the more expensive end of the yield curve, right? So that's important. The second thing I would say is I think you know, we have seen sort of capacity reset itself. You know, whereas at the beginning, you know, we were struggling for capacity whilst the market wondered, you know, what the bloody hell is going on here? You know, we don't have enough lift. And so, you know, airlines were very, you know, ingenious and came up with great solutions with Praetors and all these sorts to get capacity into the market. I think capacity now has probably actually, you know, as passenger traffic has slowly started to recover, some of those freighters or Praetors that were there have now gone back into their traditional, you know, use, and therefore some of the there may well be some more capacity challenges, particularly as the e-commerce commodity takes up a huge amount of bloody space that, if you can imagine, Chris, was previously used for a lot of perishables or you know, food stuff. So because e-commerce, I mean, smalls are not particularly great to handle, as you know. You know, it's a pain in the arse, frankly, sometimes, dependent on how you receive them from the shipper, of course. Because some shippers are really good and they all come nicely packed or bagged or whatever, and some come in, you know, a disaster mess, as you and Mr. Ambridge had seen recently, in many a place. So I think that is probably an issue. Sort of, you know, capacity probably has to sort of still sort of be aligned to demand, but we're not there yet, and far from being there, I suspect. But nothing like making hay whilst the sun shines, Chris. And there's nothing in a capitalist world. There is nothing to be ashamed of by, you know, as long as it's not, you know, sort of anti-competitive or abuse of somebody's dominant position. There's nothing to be ashamed of from operators trying to create as much yield as they possibly can.
Oh yeah, no, it's just about, you know, whether or not certain parts of our industry and other industries have looked back and thought, my God, we were really caught short there. We're not going to get caught short again. And then they start to change the way, you know, the way they look at how their whole logistics outlook is. So I think there's going to be a lot of twists and turns. But one of the areas, e-commerce, we also spoke with Brendan about this, was the undeclared dangerous goods. And the fact that e-commerce now, more than ever, because of the way it's grown, the way it's going to continue to grow, and the growth of some of the discrepancies and also the non-compliances, and in many cases flouting of rules, governments have got to now support the industry, and they've got to come down hard on anybody who does things knowingly, incorrectly, to bypass the system, because God forbid, if something happens, then the industry is going to have no choice in what they do. So far better to do it now.
Well, as you have said to me, Chris, and you're far more of an expert in this space than I am, and actually I've learned a lot from you over recent months with the work that we've been doing in this. Actually,
Alan, please record that. I'd like my grandchildren to hear that one day.
No, I think the key thing is, and the message that we've been discussing, Chris, with the conversation we've been having at regulator client level, is very much this is a whole of industry problem that requires a whole of industry solution. And that doesn't let anybody off the hook. Now, this is not a new problem. This is a problem that has existed for decades. However, the problem has been magnified to many time multiples because of the massive growth in e-commerce. So without maybe sort of telling our listeners what Brendan had said, what was sort of the IATA view? What was his sort of priority?
Yeah, no, Brendan, very direct, very sensible response, and also that it has to come from states, it has to come from government support level, and if there's any criminal, because that's what it should be termed as, people need to be addressed. Now, the podcast with Brendan will be out on Tuesday, so I hope a lot of people.
Oh, so I don't have to wait too long then. I don't have.
No, you don't have to wait too long. But seriously, he's a really like Salem said to me that I was very complimentary of the man, yet he remains quite humble. But
so, Chris, if that is the case, and it is, I mean, it's the state that is responsible. The state is responsible for the legislation and the policing of that legislation and the enforcement of that legislation, and also the penalties associated with non-compliance with the legislation. However, we know that I mean, certainly some states are pretty active, but in this space, I suspect that they've all been, a little bit lethargic when it comes to solving it, and not wanting to point out any state in particular. But if that is the case, so IATA only has really the engagement of its member airline community. I mean, more broadly, because IATA spills into other areas, but generally it's really the airline community that's as a member organization. Isn't this then an issue for ICAO, who are the ones that set the
But I think it's also I think it's also something that each airline can do with its own state, where they're doing their own communication. Everybody now should be singing the same tune, because God forbid if it's not done soon, something's going to happen. And I mentioned to Brendan about what I call the C step, because we were talking about CEOs and how they look at the business and how they've now come to respect cargo, which in some cases has crept up to 30% of the revenue. It won't stay there, but nevertheless, 30% is a number.
You've never been a more significant part of the business than you are now, Chris.
Yes, but like I said, it's something that and I said about the C steps, and basically what I was saying is that the CEOs, first C, have recognized cargo. Second C, the reason being cash flow. The third C. Now they've got capacity. Okay, they've got to start doing something. Now, on that capacity issue, they've got threats. And one of the threats is e-commerce. And if they don't start looking after the accountability of the carrier, rather than the responsibility to generate revenues, that issue is going to be really, it's going to be a tough one to deal with for the industry. And now more than ever, everybody, we've been talking about bring back better, make it matter, all these issues. It's now that somebody needs to see some actions being taken, so we prepare for a much better future, please God. Touch wood.
Well, I mean, just to add to your Caesar, I mean, to continue that on from the cash aspect, it's going to be led by control measures that ensure compliance.
Yeah. But the trouble is, when you're battling with revenue generation, most commercial colleagues and partners and parties that I've dealt with, the compliance.
None of them on this show, Chris.
No, the compliance and the control slips a little bit because there's so much emphasis on the commercial side, which is understandable.
The balance is you've got to get the balance. But I mean, I always sort of say to people, when we're trying to deliver change in a sort of an operational area, and you often get the pushback. Oh, that's unsafe. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, that's not the way we've done it. Oh, no. We've got to be safe. Well, first thing is we'll never do anything to compromise safety. However, the safest thing that you could possibly do, if you want to be the safest airline in the world, keep your airplanes on the ground, mate. Then you can ensure that you are the safest carrier by a country mile. Of course, that's not so. Look, there's balance to everything we do, but no, I do think this is something that is going to continue. It's not going to go away anytime soon. In fact, I think the problem may get worse, Chris, before it gets better, if anything.
100%. Now, people can wait for Tuesday to listen to Brendan, and hopefully they will do so in their droves.
Droves.
Yes. Now, another thing that seems to be, quite relevant is merger and acquisition. People taking advantage now of others' positions, how to consolidate, how to influence, how to impact. So there's been quite a bit of activity, obviously on the freight forwarder side. GHAs are looking now to see what makes sense from partnerships, etc. But also airports, Steve. And I think airports and GHAs are the game changers of how the cargo industry moves forward. Well,
you'd like to think so, Chris. There are often some backward steps being made at a time when airports are, cash flow, significantly reduced, or income significantly reduced. Pressures of operating in a highly regulated environment. When I say regulated, I don't mean regulated from a safety perspective. I mean regulated from an economic perspective. So massive amounts of economic regulation on large airports, hub airports, typically, 10, 15, 20 million plus. And in some markets, smaller airports are economic regulated too. At a time where capital is scarce, but actually there are committed capital development programs that have been priced into the 5-year quinquennial pricing review period, for example. That means that the airport essentially is committed to that investment because it's been priced through the review period on that basis, and with a regulated asset base that is seeing far less income to support the RAB than they historically had. So massive challenges for airports. The same, if not, I wouldn't say more challenge, but different challenges than airlines potentially have. Airlines, a lot of airlines are very asset light, Chris. Leasing companies, they lease aircraft. They don't have massive amounts of real estate and infrastructure that needs to be maintained, looked after, whatever. Yes, they got aircraft that obviously need to be maintained, looked after, but they there have been more concessions in the leasing space than there can possibly be with a regulated asset base of large infrastructure, because you can't just sort of, you can mothball things and close things down and do stuff, but you've still got to keep if you've only got one runway, whether that runway gets one movement a day or 10, you've got to keep it to the same standards you did before. Whereas an airline with 10 going from 100% of capacity to 10% can mothball 90% of the fleet, for example. An airport can't do that. So very different set of challenges. So I suspect that the demands for cash on airports actually, and the squeeze will be really coming in now, as we've seen a sort of a slower recovery in the space. So no surprise that we're now seeing, the likelihood of equity, additional equity requirements. So yes, they've done some short to medium loans and financing, converted some of their cash that they had, or deferred some of their capital expenditure into OPEX so they can keep things on the go. But now we're seeing a real kind of push, and also not just from the private sector, but particularly from the public sector, where airports are state-owned, into privatization, or for divestment, or for investment, or sale. So this week we've seen the Sydney Kingsford Smith Airport, because of course, don't forget now, Sydney has Bankstown as well, of course, but you wouldn't know that if you don't live in Sydney. I used to live in Sydney, so I know that Bankstown is there, but it's for flying Cherokees and Cessnas and the like. So Bankstown aside, Kingsford Smith is now competing Sydney West, which is a new airfield supported by the state government, New South Wales government, and being built now by Multiplex, the prime contractor, I think, on that project. So Kingsford Smith is now having to work very hard with its airline community to retain them, maintain them, and a market that was providing to Macquarie Airports before, massive dividends and cash out of the business, now is very heavily squeezed, not just because of the pandemic, but because the future doesn't look so bright. So some activity there with Sydney Kingsford Smith opening up, and a few bidders, entering that process. People like GIP and others being mentioned there in the press, looking for a slice of the action in what is generally a very strong, good, healthy market on the eastern seaboard in Australia. We've all seen some movement, I think, in Budapest.
Yeah,
because Budapest was in the hands of the state. It was then sold to the British Airports Authority, as was back in 2003 or 4, I think, and that's where people like Chris Woodruff and Stuart Wingate and some great blokes there, John Carter from the BAA across Heathrow and Gatwick, and I remember working with them on that project, and it was fabulous. And Budapest is a fabulous city where I had an absolute ball of a time. And so that's now looking for. It then went to private. I think it went to Hochtief, and then now back into state hands, and that they're looking for privatization. And also, Chris, then looking at large airports, state airports like IATA, for example. In Spain, who have got massive airport portfolio. I mean, huge number of airports in the IATA portfolio, but zero private airports in the whole of Spain. So I think whether that might be a partial privatization, or it might be a cash injection, or it might be well, not a cash injection, but it might be certainly some form of an equity transaction with a partner to come in to either take on some of those IATA airports lock, stock and barrel, or maybe an investment into the overall holding company. The one that still interests me, of course, Chris, is a place that you and I know and love well, is India. Because India is still ripe for private investment, and I think we had the transactions, well, maybe 10, 15 years ago now, I can't remember, on probably possibly longer, on Bombay and Delhi, Bangalore. I think Kochi was there as well, Sial, Kochi International Airport, and probably Hyderabad also, I think, was privatized. So, but the majority of the airports there, of which I think there were, to the last count, 50 plus, 53, 54 airports in the state of India, in the country of India. So majority is still up for the taking, and I think Airports Authority of India, when you've got a state, that has been ravished by the COVID pandemic and the effects of that on GDP and the exchequer, tax dollars essentially, and you own a large number of airports, potentially you got to start considering how do we get out of this. Maybe this is a bit of a mugs game. Let's offload these and see what we can do better. So one that I'm surprised about that's not come up is Malaysia. Not much talk about Malaysia other than the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Malaysia, ably supported by the Malaysian taxpayers, of course, through them a lifeline, as they've done to the national carrier. But Malaysia Airports, I think they've got 27 airports in their portfolio, something of that magnitude. And my memory is getting worse these days, but for numbers, it's reasonably good still for some bizarre reason. But everything else is, when the wife asked me to take the dog for a walk, suddenly I've forgotten what that was 5 minutes ago. But
what dog?
When it comes to what? Sorry,
I said what dog?
But airport numbers, sure. But 25 plus airports in Malaysia, that's not yet coming to fruition. So I think we'll see more of this, Chris. I think there's a lot to be said in this space. They are very secure and safe. I mean, I again, not giving investment advice, but typically airports, more so than airlines, are a very safe investment. And when you look at the EBITDA of most airports, most major airports, and compare it to the EBITDA of airlines, as an investor, return on invested capital and return on capital employed will be far, far better in an airport than it ever will be in an airline.
Yeah, and it's a good opportunity now for people not just for that reason, but people who want to actually make a change, Steve. And I think if an airport now owner realizes that they've got their own ecosystem, and if they get the whole community of that airport together and support each other as one marketing tool to attract carriers and indeed other supporting industries, not just the obvious, it's an incredible opportunity. And some obviously are going to be more cargo oriented than others, but nonetheless, I think there's going to be so much of it. Now, an area that you haven't mentioned yet, but I'm sure you've got some comment on, would be the USA and Canada.
Canada is,
especially,
I like
especially
Canada.
The USA, Steve, because
I like Canada a lot, Chris.
Because as far as competition is concerned, and quality and standards and modernization, I mean, holy mother of Moses.
So Canada has multiple private airport operators. Canada is far, far ahead of anything that the USA has done in the airport space. And in fact, some of the Canadian airport operators like Vantage, for example, also operate airports in the international space. They've ventured into places like the Caribbean, South America, and so on. And they've got either management contracts or they own those airports down there. So I think Canada is in a different league compared to the good old US of A. I have never been a fan of US airports. I find US airports very depressing. They all look the same. They've all got the same linoleum flooring or carpet tiles that we used to have in the kitchen in 1983. And they're a pretty miserable existence, with the exception of places like T7 in JFK, which I think is a superb terminal, JetBlue, and T4's gone through massive amounts of renovation. But if you look at the typical facilities occupied by the majors, American, Delta, and United, they're pretty bloody depressing, Chris. Nobody's doing anything. It's all on fixed gate leases. All of the airports sit under the control of the Port Authority or the city. So the Port Authority, in the case of places like New York that look after LaGuardia, Newark, and JFK, or in most of the rest of the US under the city manager, which is a very strange title. I'm the CEO of the city, who reports to the mayor. And as we've discovered during the pandemic, politicians are not very good at managing risk or dealing with sort of major curveballs that are thrown at them and responding to that. Unlike the private sector, particularly in aviation and airlines, where they've always had to respond pretty readily and pretty quickly to either threats or real risks and challenges of the day. So I think the US is ripe for change, Chris. Will it ever change? Will we ever see a privatized airport environment in the United States of America? Not in my lifetime. Not on your Nelly. Why? It's protectionist. It's a very backwards kind of environment where the state Americans accept mediocre things. They accept mediocre service. They accept mediocre airlines. They accept pricing in a domestic market that just does not exist in Europe. The cost per seat mile, unfortunately, got to say that because these people can't deal with metric system. But the cost per seat mile, they don't even have kettles in their house, Chris. I mean, how did you manage to live in the US without a kettle?
Oh no,
the first thing you bought was a kettle. Every American house, they don't know what a kettle's for. So how do you make your tea or your coffee? We put hot water in the microwave. I mean, that's the mentality we're dealing with. Can you imagine them privatizing an airport?
Oh, no, I loved it. I loved it when I was there.
So, to conclude the point in a more serious note, is it suits the airlines to lock up infrastructure. It suits the airlines to lock up gates to prevent new entrants, people coming in. That just wouldn't be allowed in a free market like we have in Europe in Asia, in Australia, for example. It works in the US because they're protectionist and it's an anti-competitive environment. You've seen what the majors have done to the likes of Qatar, Emirates, and Etihad, challenging their very existence and their very business models just because they can't keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah, but there's room for people, and when we started these, we used to give a little saying. Do you remember every show we had a little saying? And I've got one that I've just been given. I was giving it to it this morning, and it was in a card, all right, on a birthday card, and it says, "It's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see." And I think people now are seeing a lot more than they've ever done before. And like we've had quite a few airports recently on the podcast shows, and I've got to say, the way they're addressing things, customer service, improvements, car parking, direct access for passengers. They also mention about changing the carpets to a more manageable. I
didn't know they'd said that, but I'm very pleased to hear it.
Yeah, but they're all and
the only other airports in the world that I know had a carpet was the one in Cairns, in far north Queensland, which is stuck in the 1970s. So I mean, that's probably the state of Queensland, let alone just the airport. But yeah, that's the only other airport that I remember with a carpet.
Yeah, no, but we've done some very good ones recently. We've done Atlanta, we did Tampa and Orlando. I mean, the things that they're doing there, and it's one of the most visited airports there. But it's nice to see what they're doing, and I think people are now seeing a lot more than what they ever did before. So I think airports and GHAs, they're the game changers. If they start supporting each other and giving customers and people that need to use the infrastructure, etc., what they need, they're going to be a very powerful marketing tool to bring business to them, rather than the way where airlines choose an airport and then you have to deal with it. I think now there can be a little bit of a shift there in momentum, and I think they've got a great opportunity. Well, and also, sorry, Steve, one of the things you said there about people who are developing airports, etc., and somebody who's Canadian who would probably endorse what you said earlier. Stan Raith, I was talking to him this week, and he's outspoken like yourself. So I'd say you're a pair of bird dogs. But what he was saying as well is that people who are now looking at the future, and especially from airports have got the chance now to define what you have to do as a developer, as somebody who's going to come in as a tenant, and start moving towards the things that are necessary for the sustainability of the business, including sustainability, not just as a business element, but also looking after this little world.
Yeah, it's off a much lower. I mean, the US has recovered quite dramatically already to very good pre-COVID volumes. I don't know what number they're at now, but certainly from what I'm looking at anecdotally, domestically is pretty good. But they never really flew internationally anyway. I think less than 40% of Americans have a passport, so that wasn't an issue for them. But of a much lower base, Chris, whereby you do have that asset base that I was talking about earlier. Now, whilst the regulator system works very differently in the US, clearly with a fixed cost base and a set of infrastructure, you've got the ability you have to amortize the cost of that are via your passenger volumes.
Yep.
So when you look at the level of investment required to turn the dial, really, I mean, materially, not just skirting on the edges with a car park, put a new sign up or getting rid of some carpet. That's all relatively straightforward. What I'm saying is actually there has to be fundamental material change to the way in which American airports operate. That will require significant amounts of capital to be available in the system that I do not think will be available, but I will wait to see. I'm very happy to take an all expenses paid trip to Atlanta or Orlando or Miami, as you're offering with your podcast interviewees. So I'm ready. When they tell me the time to come is to do the evaluation, the critique, I'll be there.
Well, let's see who reaches out, if anybody reaches out. Now, getting near to the end of this week's show, just a few little snippets. So something that popped up, Qatar Airways. Okay, Mr. Backer, the chief, now hinting that he might bring the 380s back. Whereas before,
Sounds slightly schizophrenic.
Oh, well, I wouldn't use those words, but what I'm saying is, although
in the nicest possible sense, because Akbar is somebody who said only 2 weeks ago, with great conviction, we made a mistake with the 380. We should never have bought the bloody thing. We want to get rid of it.
Well, I'm just saying, while being interviewed by Flight Plan, Qatar Airways CEO Akbar Al-Bakr suggested that a chance the giant of the skies will return in its grey and purple livery exists. Al-Bakr said, okay, there's a very small possibility.
Published on April the 1st.
No, Steve. Very good. No. But it's a Marmite.
I find it very hard to believe, Chris.
Yeah.
Well, I flew in it very recently. I was very pleased to fly in out of Heathrow. I like the airplane, providing the seat is in the correct cabin. It was great to see it back, but I was surprised. I mean, I live, as probably most of our listeners know, on the flight path of the westerly arrivals into Heathrow.
Yeah.
So just on the river, and I've been seeing the 380 coming back in since probably middle of May.
Yeah.
Which was nice to see the EK 380 coming back in, but I was surprised that there was traffic for it, primarily because Emirates is not allowed to bring passengers in. There's banned. There's zero passengers inbound because UAE is a red list country.
Yeah.
And so they're relying on outbound, and it seems still excessive to me to be operating a 380, whereby I saw the load was I wouldn't say it was chockers, but it was busy, but it didn't fill a 380, that's for sure.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues. It takes an awful lot of effort to fill them, and then fuel efficiency and from an environmental perspective, and then how many hours they're in the sky. So I mean, it's stacked up against them, but who knows? So maybe they'll come back. Then there's another little bit of news about aggression and conflict on aircraft for all sorts of reasons. So something else. The last 2 times I've flown, Steve, one of the things that I really liked during, should we say, the earlier days when you were still allowed to fly, is they boarded you by seat rows and they disembarked you by seat rows, but they made it very clear not to do what everybody does under normal. So as soon as that little ping, everybody's up and out and everything's open above and they're trying to get their bags and everything. I think there's a chance now as well for people to just start to slow things down a little bit and let people be under less stress and less pressure, which causes these conflicts and pushing and shoving and bags coming out. And I think there's got to be a little review of how they do the embarkation and disembarkation as well.
But for what purpose?
Because the last 2 flights I was on, so in particular, there was a lady who was sitting against the window, okay? And I'm not being funny, she would have had a better existence if she'd have been in the WWE. She would have made an incredible wrestler. And she pushed past these other 2 people.
American.
She was trying to get, I'm not joking, I think she would have trod on them, stood over them, everything. She was as aggressive as anything. And the two poor people who were there, they were just like, I don't want any of this. The woman came out and she pulled 2 huge bags out of the overhead, which nearly decapitated some of the people behind.
Slung them into her bra, and off she went.
No, I won't go, Steve. I've got to stay away from that one. And then she pulled this enormous, although it was light, it was huge in capacity, out of the opposite, and she was desperate to get off as quick as possible. Now, all I'm just thinking is one of the things I was most impressed with on one particular airline is they said, ladies and gentlemen, we want to get you off as quickly as possible, but we don't want to cause any inconvenience. So we'd like to disembark by rows. So obviously, if you're sitting up the front, you're last on, but you're first off. So they were coming off like that. And it made so much sense, Steve. And they were doing it by 5 rows at a time. And it made a lot of sense. People had to get off. And I don't think it took any longer than just letting them all go crazy and try and get off the aircraft.
Well, I have to dispute that, Chris, because one thing, you never know why somebody else is in a hurry, because they might have a short connection or a tight so you know,
They
the
said
sample
that,
size.
Steve, at the beginning. They said that during the flight. So half an hour before landing, they said, if anybody has got an urgent connection or needs to get off first, please let a cabin attendant know. And they actually,
yeah, but you know, most of the public don't listen to those things, right? They're tuned into their own devices and doing their own thing.
well, they managed it very well, Steve, because they made everybody sit down until those people came up to the front first once it landed. And I thought that was superb.
You must have been on British Airways, I suspect.
I won't say who,
No,
but
well,
I actually wrote a letter saying how impressed I was. I mean, not that anybody read it, but how impressed I was and what an incredible job that the crew did. They were superb, Steve.
well, I have to say, I mean, I was flying on British Airways a lot over the last 4 months, probably, you know, as you know, twice a fortnight, and so doing, you know, half a dozen flights possibly in a month, back and forth, and they did do rows in 5 blocks, and they did, even if you were in Club Europe, they boarded you. Not that I'm saying that I was, but high chance that I would have been. But they boarded you last, which is atypical to the normal or untypical to the normal process, where as a GGL or as a club passer you could board at any time. What we've since discovered, Chris, in some work we're doing with another client is actually that random boarding is the quickest boarding. When you board people in groups of rows, as 5 as you're talking. So I'm sure it's BA, because it's BA that did it in 5 rows. They will board rows 25 to 30 first. That means that rows 25 to 30 all board at the same time. They're all looking for space in the same locker. They're all sitting down in the same seat and then getting up, blocking others from getting in, standing up, and they're all congested in a small space at the same part of the aircraft at the same time. They then do 20 to 30, they then do 15 to 30, then do 10 to 30, so on and so forth. So that does nothing for social distancing, despite what people thought it did. Actually did the opposite. It congests people in the same area at the same time together. It delayed the boarding process because you're all looking for the same seat at the same time with the bags going in the same place. So what you've just said, actually, we've proven from doing some timing trials, is completely opposite. Doing random boarding means, so anybody can board the aircraft at any time. So you all come up to the gate at any time and you board the aircraft. And what you find is you've got somebody who's boarded first, who's in row 10, next person in row 16, next person in 24, next person in 17, next person in 9. And what happens is you get this natural spacing in the cabin. Nobody's fighting for the locker at the same time. Nobody's fighting to get into the aisle at the same time as you are sitting in the middle seat and never to move. Yeah, understand. So actually, the process was on a 320 a good 4 or 5 minutes faster than doing row boarding. So it just goes to disprove the theory. You think that's the right thing because it's calm and controlled. Actually, it's the opposite. In your mind, you thought that. The reality was very different. From an airline perspective and from social distancing, it did not work.
I would just like to come back, okay?
Go ahead. Sure.
Okay. On the boarding, yes, they started down the back, but they didn't follow on at the back. They went from the back to the middle to the front to the back, then the next one, and they were coordinating with the crew. And that's why I thought it was so exceptional. Coming off, they did it from the front in rows going off. But the boarding, Steve, I thought was superb. Because again, like you, I've looked at many things like that. And I don't think they did, I actually don't think they did 5 rows. I think they did 3 rows. 3, I'm not sure, anyhow, but it was either 3 or 5. And that they started down the back. Then there was a row in the middle, and then there was a row at the front. And then they kept doing that.
But you see, that's even worse, Chris. That's even worse, because what you're relying on is that person listening to the announcement, and 2, being present at the boarding gate at the time that their row is called. So what you're then doing is you create this lag in the process where you're allowing a delay to form whilst you're waiting for the 2 or 3 people that might be sitting in that row on low density flights. So it really is a very poor way, in my view. Having done, in 15 years, the project that I've done consulting the most, actually since 2006, 15 years. Oh God, I can count as well. The project
you always said you remember numbers.
The project I worked on the most is around PTS, the precision timing schedule. and developing shorter turnarounds, getting better conformance at turnarounds, dialing down the turns where we can take incremental reduction and delivering more aircraft available time to the network team so that they can use the aircraft more efficiently and increasing utilization. If we go down the path that you're suggesting about being a little bit more relaxed and creating more time periods, I think actually it'll work to the sorry to say, because it will work to the detriment of the carrier, because these longer turns that carriers has put in place now for a couple of reasons. One, because of that whole boarding, disembarkation and groups and rows and so on. Second thing is because of the enhanced cleaning that's required. That will long-term kill airlines. So that is not possible. And just to be clear, get rid of a misnomer. It's not only low-cost carriers that care about utilization. A British Airways 320 is turned around in 35 minutes. An EasyJet 320 is turned around in 30 minutes. Ryanair 738, they would say, well, that's 20% worse than best in class. They turn the 738s in 25 minutes. So same as Aer Lingus at 30-minute turns on the 320. So these carriers, Chris, now are so dependent on getting utilization out of them, particularly now where they had to get rid of aircraft, or they've done end of leases, or they'll be wanting more out of the same airframe for less. So I wouldn't bet in fact, not even my last dollar, I wouldn't bet any dollar if I had lots of dollars on any change to that going forward.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Thank you for that educated and experienced response and direct.
Masterclass.
Masterclass, yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, I didn't realise I paid for, but like I said, the experience. I got to say, every single person.
40 quid you paid for that, Chris.
A lot. Thank you. A lot less.
That was that nip. That was the nip.
Oh my God, yeah. It was a lot less stress. But anyhow, a group of people who won't have to worry about whether it's front, back, mid, or whatever is in Thailand, where they've suspended now domestic flights because of the surge again. So they've suspended it from, I think it was the day before yesterday, up until the first week of August. So, there's still so much uncertainty and responses going on. And again, what that's going to do, Steve, is it's going to affect consumer confidence. So, it's incredible.
Asia Pacific is very slow, Chris, and very slow to get back out of the blocks. He says, with an athletic analogy, as the opening ceremony for the Tokyo Olympics is in front of my eyes. Yeah. It's very flat this year, very flat indeed. I can't get excited about it at all.
No, but I think this year should all be about the athletes and not about the event.
But Asia is bad, Chris. It's bad here for all the reasons that we knew it would be. Let's call it vaccine inequality, to be polite. Also, vaccine hierarchy has played a big part here as well. Governments allowing people to choose what vaccine they get in a world first. Never been able to do it in our lives before. I mean, when I say choose, you can choose to get a vaccine, but you can't choose what the brand or the manufacturer of said vaccine. I mean, that seems to be an unusual occurrence. Corruption at the forefront of decision-making in governments, and politicking, stay of tenure, and political kind of livelihoods coming before helping the population. So it's not one country. It's, I think, many countries find themselves that problem, and of course for the population, the public, and the taxpayer, they are finding themselves rather disappointed and put out by it. But Australia's gone back into lockdown as well. You've seen all the states in Australia, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, all for a positivity rate of 0.13%.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean,
the world has gone mad.
It has, but another interesting statistic, and this comes from Willie Walsh: 83% of airline passengers support continuing with in-flight mask wearing, and of that 83, 65% think it should be mandatory.
Good for them. I will not be wearing one, and I was not in that sample.
No, but if the sample is correct, you may have no choice.
Not in Emirates first. You don't. So all good.
I won't. I'm not even going to comment on that one. I'm not even going to comment on that one, mate. I'm not going to comment. But now, listen. What do you think about organisations and parties that are now openly adding certain additional costs and relating it to COVID?
Fair, I think.
Yeah. So, like the Heathrow one now with the £5 drop-off charge.
Slightly tenuous, but it might help them get somewhere closer to their environmental obligations for the third runway approval. That's now a white elephant in any case, in my view. But look, I think that's more environmentally driven. I'd rather people were just honest and said that. Hal should just say, in line with Gatwick and Stansted, the other two major London airports, and those Luton as well, in line with the rest of the London major airports, we are introducing a charge which we've never done before. We will allow taxi drivers of electric black cabs to be exempt.
Yeah, but that's not what they're saying. It's only blue badge holders.
So I know.
Taxis.
Or Uber drivers who drive electric cars to be exempt. I would have said that, for environmental reasons. Plus the fact we need to fill the coffers, and it might generate a couple of £1 a year.
Yeah. But that's something that's coming in now. And Lisbon, got one here. 200 flights cancelled at Lisbon airport at the start of the strike. Why on earth are people striking at such a time?
Well, because these my view on socialism, Chris. But it's a well-held view. I think it's very short-sighted of people to do that. We saw it last year at the time that action was being taken by employers to reduce their cost burden, and they were threatening striking then. Actually, personally, if I were there, I'd just dismiss them, bugger them.
Yeah, no, but for ground force to be doing that, I just think that's crazy, and it just shows that something has gone wrong with the team or the understanding between management and employees. It shouldn't be a battle; it should be a joint effort.
Well, I mean, unions only exist, in my view, whereby the existing and historical legacy comes for a long time, but they only exist whereby there is no proper works council or employee forum, or they don't feel valued by the employer. They need to take it to an external party. Why would you want a third party, getting involved in your business with your employer? I mean, that seems perverse to me.
Yeah.
But if you don't give an avenue for employees to engage, what's the alternative? So, I mean, unions have a place and a role to play in that. A word that I use a lot, Chris, maintaining equilibrium.
Yep. No, I agree.
Ensure the balance of power is there.
And there shouldn't be, we're battling or we're against or it's us and them. I think when that sort of terminology comes in, you've already lost the battle. Now, to end the show, to finish, okay, here's one for you, and I'm sure you will be the first.
Grant Shapps.
You will be the first. No. I think we banned him for a few weeks, and rightly so. Here's one for you, okay, and I'm sure it would make a great T-shirt, 1A, okay. That's what should be on the T-shirt. If I get one made for you, I'm going to put 1A, nowhere else. But Emirates launching the first ever Dubai-Miami non-stop service. There's a nice little trip for you. When you go over to the airport, when you go over to view airports in the States, you can go
Kuala Lumpur, Dubai, Miami.
There you
Perfect. Go. Can I take Mr. Ambridge with me, because he's also a fan of One Alpha.
Yes, he is. Yeah, the pair of you.
So
it's the future Prime Minister and foreign policy expert.
Not sure who's who, Chris.
But what a pairing! What a pairing, eh?
Dave, get your passport. We're off to Miami.
Yeah. All right. Listen, it's lovely to see you again, and thanks for
so soon.
Thanks for joining me on my birthday twice, and we'll speak soon. And enjoy.
You better go off and see the family, Chris. And love to say, I can't believe it's been a year since your previous birthday, which was in slightly warmer climes, I seem to remember. Steve,
that was 2 years ago.
No, it wasn't.
If you're talking about if you're talking about my birthday party in Spain, my friend, that was 2 years ago.
So actually, you're a year older. You're a year older than I thought you were.
Yeah, I am indeed, mate. Yeah, I am indeed. So remember,
Well,
it's not
you don't look at
what you
Chris.
look at that matters, it's what you see.
Cheers, Chris.
Take care, lovely boy.
Have a good weekend. Enjoy
Yeah,
the
you
rest of your
too.
day. Happy birthday again.
Thank you. Cheers.